Cyberpunk 2077 has a massive unsolved mystery, with the peculiar part about this one being I think a ton of people on one side just completely forgot about this, and then perhaps on another side have just never been aware of it to begin with. Of course, to an extent, this is pretty understandable. With the release of Cyberpunk 2077, there are quite a few other things to talk about, which definitely seem to overshine some of the secrets that have been discovered and not actually solved, but in effect, what we're talking about here is the multi-year long ARG that was taking place for Cyberpunk 2077. When I originally sat down to film this video, the plan was to recap the ARG as a forgotten ARG, how CDPR just never actually finished it, despite the fact that it already has taken place over multiple years, and in the process taking us to multiple websites, multiple codes had to be solved, and even some physical packages and physical locations. And although initially I thought it was just dead or forgotten about, perhaps some of the other issues arise and took attention away from it, it seems like this isn't actually over, and as you dive deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, it very much so seems like there are several mysteries in Cyberpunk 2077 itself that could connect to the ARG. We had the mysterious character with Mr. Blue Eyes, these mysterious statues you could find around Night City, and even Gary. And where things start to get juicy with this mystery is they're all connected. So in this video, I want to recap a good chunk of this rabbit hole overall. There's a lot of information to cover. And as it stands right now, this is an ongoing unsolved mystery, so hopefully this video will serve to motivate at least some of you to actually get involved or check it out for yourself. Now the way I'm going to structure this video is first recap the ARG, as that's what happened first. If you already followed the ARG or don't care about a good chunk of the year plus progress that was made on it, I do have a timestamp down below, so you can kind of skip to the final step where we find ourselves now, or even skip to some of the in-game mysteries that may be connected and the eventual solution. And if you want to get a bit deeper on the ARG, the Game Detectives Wiki and Discord are a great place to start. That's where a lot of this work and progress has been done and a major source for this video. But to fully do this justice, we have to back up and explain somewhat what's happened during this ARG. Now here, I'm recapping a year and a half of content, but first, backing things up, you probably remember that fabled night at E3 2018. During the Microsoft conference, we had that glitch pop up, and lo and behold, we got the first real proper trailer of the modern Cyberpunk 2077. It was huge. It immediately blew up online on socials, and also that whole glitched into the presentation thing was pretty cool. And it also happened to kick off the ARG. While all of those codes were flashing on screen, some of these were actually codes for games on GOG that could be redeemed, but also in the mix was an IP address that led to a Quadra-themed website, Quadra being one of the vehicle companies you could find in Cyberpunk right now. This website featuring a default login and prompted you for a password. That password ended up actually being the license plate from the Quadra in the trailer, and once putting in this password and login, it did ask you for your email. And one of the interesting parts about this was it was actually a fairly small size. Unlike some other websites or passwords we'll talk about in this video, this one only let in a certain amount of people, and after a while, enough people putting in that password, it mentioned how a quota had been met, and later on, these people actually ended up getting a care package from CDPR that contained this shirt, which is pretty cool in its own right. You have a cool shirt that only a handful of people got, and you got it by being a part of the ARG, but even further, this will come back into relevance later, and it's worth noting this ARG started all the way back in summer of 2018. It's been going on for a while. Now, a couple of months later, this image was posted up on Twitter, some concept art for the game, and what you could find in it was a secret link that led to a couple of other images, and after some sleuthing, eventually led us all to a Trauma Team International website. On this website, you were greeted by a bot named David, who also gave out a limited number of codes that were deciphered and later input into the orders section of the website. So if you're one of the people to actually get a proper order number and input it, you also got an email from CDPR as one of the lucky few chosen. These people would later receive an email asking for their address where they would get a second care package, but also two attachments were on this email. One of them being an invoice for their Trauma Team life insurance order, as well as a new cipher. And what was found that using this cipher, as well as those t-shirts previously distributed, it revealed the word Monday. This is a very famous Monday in August, as it happened to be the Monday where the 48 minutes of gameplay was officially released to the public. And there are a few minor things to be found along with this stream and the gameplay, but it was mostly just nice gestures and kind words from CDPR, nothing something super cryptic, and honestly at this point things got pretty quiet. We're now 2 months into the ARG, but we didn't get the next major update until a full year later, during E3 2019, where this tweet was sent out. This clearly being coded in that the samurai was made up of 0 and 1s, this being binary, and if you translated that into letters, you would get, "Seems you're not among the sheep after all, wanna play a game? Watch for the beeps." Shortly after that message was discovered, the pre-order page for Cyberpunk 2077 was updated. What you could find is, by the Cyberpunk logo, a flashing blue light seeming to be the beep. This flashing ended up eventually being discovered to be Morse code, and the Morse code was translated into these coordinates. These coordinates leading us to the LA office of CD Projekt themselves, an actual physical location that people went to, and on the door of the office they found this QR code. This QR code leading to another new website with Aramis, which had a secret download link by clicking the S in the website's name as it appeared on screen, which would immediately download a password-protected RAR file, some kind of zipped file that needed a password to unlock. Quickly it was discovered that Johnny Silverhand was the password, which led to a second password-protected RAR file, as well as another kind message from CDPR for those participating. And about 1 month later, we got a tweet from one of the community managers that was mysterious, so people immediately tried this as a password, and it worked. What we found was a file called 4035 and a series of number in that text document. If you convert 4035 from a octal number format to a more common decimal number format, it would change the 4035 to 2077, which is the big clue that that's what you had to do with all of these numbers. So if you did it for the rest of the numbers in this file, it would give you this assortment of numbers, not really meaning much, but if you converted these numbers to letters based on their corresponding place in the alphabet, so a 1's an A 2 is a B, you would get Ping Tech Torn. And if you rearrange that, you could eventually land on nightcorp.net. And although I briefly am going over this in like 30 seconds, you have to imagine there was a lot of work going into deciphering this and figuring out what exactly all of this meant. At the end of the day, they just started with 4035 and a list of numbers. And from here, things definitely get a bit more intense. So nightcorp.net at first glance is just a largely standard website. No real functional buttons, as well as a background that is just an anagram for Nightcorp, different spellings of the word. It seemed like there wasn't much going on here at all, except if you left this website open, you would eventually hear a sound. And in fact, over time, different sounds would play at different intervals. And to make a long story short, over a 24-hour period, the website actually played 13 different sounds. What these were discovered to be were numbers in 13 different languages. And again, this is another one that took a while to figure out. Some of these sounds had giant gaps between them, the longest being 156 minutes in between sounds being played. So people had to just sit here all day and listen and record. These numbers eventually being discovered to equal a Polish telephone number. And upon calling the telephone, you would hear this. As I'm sure many of you realized, that was a phonetic alphabet. So uniform meant you, and if you applied that, you would get a Reddit-style username, /u/u corp thing, which did equate to a Reddit account that was recently created. On the first day, this account answered a couple of questions, but nothing really ARG related. But a couple of months later, in September of 2019, he did start talking about Nightcorp. Corp thing saying how he works for Nightcorp, but he can't talk about what he's working on because it's a top secret project, and he could in fact be killed for just reaching out to civilians around it. But in fact, how there'll be tests around the project. Some people were already tested and failed, some found the clues and are on the list, but how that's all he could tell us for now. Then talking about how Sandra Dorset wants Nightcorp to fail, and how Sandra Dorset apparently escaped the hospital recently. Sandra Dorset, as you probably remember, being that character we save at the start of the 48-minute gameplay, and actually being a fully fledged character in Cyberpunk 2077 now with the full game. And shortly after this message was sent by the Reddit user Corp thing, a user named Sandra D joined the Discord where a lot of this decoding was going on to give further clues. We also saw a full post by the Nightcorp Reddit account. Both of these clues helped with solving a recently published Sudoku puzzle by the Cyberpunk Twitter account, which eventually led to another message. So thus far, the relevant elements are both Sandra Dorset as well as Nightcorp, both being things we could see in game, but this is where we really enter into the final stage of the ARG. In October of 2019, Sandra Dorset returned on Discord to type out this cryptic code, which was pretty easily deciphered into just being Netwatch, and using the term Netwatch and doing a domain search, eventually the website netwatch-ncpd.com was discovered. And shortly thereafter, several YouTubers actually started receiving packages related to the the ARG and seemingly having a key for this website. I was fortunate enough to actually be one of the people to receive these packages back in December of 2019. And to simplify things here, each of the packages contained 5 envelopes, these being 4 codes and 1 final answer. And of course, over time, all of these were figured out. Some of the codes were things like riddles, typical ciphers, and even some pattern completion stuff. And then with the 5th envelope, what you had was a QR code. And using the solutions from the first 4 envelopes, you could finish the QR code, and scanning this QR code would bring you to a sub-location on the Netwatch website, netwatch-ncpd.com/archives. This prompting you with a now full-on username and password login. And this is where the important stuff happens. After all of that, a year and a half of work, going to physical locations, physical packages being sent out, as well as numerous ciphers, codes, and websites, all we had to do was find a username and password. And, well, that's actually where this stops. Or at the very least, all that's been discovered thus far, as nobody's ever been able to log into this website. Now, the timing on this could be relevant to why another clue didn't come quickly thereafter. This final clue with the envelopes and this website were discovered in December of 2019. Of course, in January of 2020, a little over a year ago now, we saw the first delay for Cyberpunk. And although users kept searching for clues over the first few months of that year, shortly thereafter, a community manager did confirm that the ARG was somewhat on hold at the time. And initially, my video was going to really stop here, talking about how CDPR ran an ARG for a year and a half and then kind of forgot to keep updating it. But that's actually not the case, it seems. As we heard later in December from a community manager again that the ARG wasn't done yet, and even further tweets from an employee at CDPR mentioning how there were still some undiscovered things in the game. So seemingly this ARG isn't dead, it's just having a year-plus long hiatus, or perhaps this next clue has simply not been found yet. And this is where we get into a different mystery, or perhaps the same one that's just getting continued. There's several mysterious quests in Cyberpunk 2077 that we're going to talk about here that all have a bit of a connective tissue. One aspect about them or another that is easily missable, but actually makes it seem like all of this is leading to one larger story. The very important part about all of this is it even has a connection to the ARG overall. And I do really want to reinforce that, although it seems to me at least somewhat likely there's a connection between these in-game quests and this in-game mystery and the ARG, because they talk about some of the same stuff, Sandra Dorset, Night Corp, etc. They technically could end up being two totally separate things. But either way, our story here starts with Sandra Dorset. Sandra Dorset, of course, being a key character during that ARG. We heard how she hacked into that account, actually left messages as clues on Discord servers during the ARG, and her official background is she was a Night Corp employee, which Night Corp hosted several of the websites we go to during this ARG. So in-game, after saving Sandra in the info, later on you could actually get a side quest to retrieve her databank. This is right on top of another gig, so you typically will be doing this other gig and actually just get the prompt to retrieve Sandra's databank. And at this location, it was seemingly stolen by scavs. That was what we were saving her from in the beginning. And although you can just bring it back to her without looking into it, you also have the opportunity to decrypt it here and read it. Where it does read, for Night Corp internal use only, the tests have come back successful. The artificial intelligence CN07 has proven itself capable of bypassing commercial, device-specific, and macro security systems accessible to Night Corp employees of the lowest ranks. None of the test subjects were aware that this experiment was being conducted on them. In compliance with the orders it was given, CN07 focused mostly on subject HK13, which at the time of the experiment's commencement was classified as calm and empathetic. After a period of subliminal conditioning, as we predicted, HK13 began to display acute psychopathic behavior. The highlight was a dispute over coffee, during which HK13 strangled one of their colleagues, then jumped out the 16th floor window of the research facility. We will soon commence the next phase of the procedure and install CN07 onto the device for our actual target. So in effect here, what's going on is Night Corp is developing an artificial intelligence that can be used to control the minds of humans. In the shard, what we're finding out is they're using it on some of their lower ranked employees and seeing what kind of behavior changes they can yield, with this one employee seemingly entering into cyberpsychosis and doing some rash and completely insane things. In the context of the larger quest with Sandra Dorset, basically she stole this from Night Corp and is potentially going to use it to expose them. During the quest, you have a few options as to how to handle this. You could kill her, you could just move on and leave her be, and also if you read around her apartment, you could tell she is extremely nervous. Not only does she have have her own turret installed, but she's worried Night Corp is listening or following her. And this is a great starting off point as far as these in-game quests go, because it seems like this really does connect to the ARG in a very direct way. If you look back at those Discord messages from Corp thing, they describe how Night Corp is working on a top secret project, how there will be tests, some were already tested and failed, some found the clues and are on the list, it's all I can tell you for now. Seems like this is very directly referencing the mind control project, and perhaps Sandra Dorset is one of the employees on that list, and even perhaps a bit more evidence that there is very much so something to this. That same community manager tweeted out this picture of Sandra back at the end of 2020. Somebody replied to that saying, "I was so glad this was there, finally met the one that drove us a bit crazy." This seeming to be in reference to some of those messages left by Sandra that people are trying to decode or find out the puzzle behind, to which the community manager responds, "I have a feeling she ain't done yet," which seems to be a pretty big clue that this does in fact lead somewhere. And it's not totally clear where this questline or story will go, but it does lead us into the next and perhaps the biggest aspect of this in-game mystery, and that is with the quest Dream On, which you're conducting for the Parallezes in Cyberpunk 2077. This is actually probably one of the most revealing quests in the game, one of the best side quests available, where more or less, after doing an introductory quest for the Parallezes, this being a couple who is running for mayor, or at least the husband is running for mayor, they call you back for a follow-up and kind of mysterious or interesting thing that happened at their apartment that they want you to investigate. And things seem almost immediately to be somewhat connected with Night Corp. Right as you're walking into their apartment at the start of this quest, you could hear Mr. Parallez on the phone talking about Night Corp. Now, of course, the conversation is cut off. We don't know exactly what's going on there, but more or less the gist of this quest is how Mr. Parallez had a very weird and suspicious event happen to him. One night he heard a noise in their apartment, he grabbed his weapon to go out and explore, and he found some kind of hooded and mysterious person in their apartment. From there, he took one shot at them and then immediately collapsed to the ground. He later woke up having the whole thing be a blur and actually finding nothing in his apartment out of place. We're hired to explore and investigate what actually went on here. The quest itself is pretty cool. You're going to be playing detective across the Parallez's entire apartment, trying to find clues and information about what happened, which eventually leads you to this hidden room. The Parallezes for protection hired SSI as a security firm. This being questionable because rather than the larger Arasaka or Militech, SSI is a relatively small firm that typically wouldn't handle a client of this stature and level of fame. And it's deduced that SSI is secretly monitoring the Parallezes from this room, or perhaps a larger corporation using SSI as a front. And also at the time of this discovery, Mrs. Parallez has some weird headache that pops up out of nowhere where she has to remove herself from the situation briefly. After a bit more detective work, you discover this van that seems to be communicating with the apartment somewhat. You get into a brief car chase with this van where it ends up at a Maelstrom base. The drivers of the van will try and escape actually into a completely cloaked AV. You can see the AV fly off into the distance, and then from there, after clearing out all of the Maelstrom as well as the van drivers themselves, which are from some unidentified organization, you actually scan the van to discover a ton of information about brain scans and neurological movement of the Parallezes. As it more or less seems, this corporation is in some way, shape, or form actually editing the memories and perhaps doing some degree of mind control on the Parallezes. And although no explicit connection can be found, we don't know what organization is doing this directly, it certainly seems to have a lot of connective tissue to what we discovered during that Sandra Dorset quest. What Night Corp was doing to their employees, perhaps in a more advanced stage, that AI could have been upgraded. From here, you talk to both Parallezes to get a bit more context and information around this. Mrs. Parallez was suspecting something mysterious or suspicious has been going on for a long time, and it ends off with a final meeting with Mr. Parallez, who is very defensive and somewhat suspicious about what's going on here. From there, the quest ends, and shortly thereafter, you'll get a text how the Parallezes are thankful for your service, but want nothing else to do with you. This seeming to suggest that the mind control aspect of this is motivating them to cut ties with you. Even on some of those internal computers, you could see how this organization didn't really want them interacting with you at all. But this quest actually gets quite a bit deeper, as in that final interaction, off in the distance, you could find a very mysterious Mr. Blue Eyes watching you talk to Mr. Parallez. Upon scanning him, it doesn't reveal much outside of the name of Mr. Blue Eyes. Upon jumping over and inspecting him, you could actually find he is wearing a near identical outfit to Mr. Parallez. There are a few differences on Mr. Blue Eyes' outfit, but it's extremely similar. The clothes underneath are exactly the same. And after about a minute or so, Mr. Blue Eyes will simply vanish out of thin air. So the immediate assumption is something deeper is going on here with Night Corp. There's some kind of connection with this AI and mind control, but we actually do get even a bit deeper with two other quests in Cyberpunk 2077 that also seem connected. As we work our way over to Gary. You probably know Gary as CoCarnage. He's a popular streamer put into this game, and you'll meet him early on as a conspiracy theorist. You may have not even known he has his own quest. Basically, as you find him, he is spouting nonsense, or what may not be nonsense, about various conspiracy theories he believes in. You have to revisit him 5 times and listen to 5 of his different theories. Running away and just running back doesn't work. You'll have to run pretty far away and kind of reset the chunk, but upon a 6th return, you could actually find him talking about a conspiracy theory to do with nomads. This angers some nomads that are walking by, and you could resolve this conflict one way or another. But after this, you actually can get Gary's side quest. He describes how there's going to be a drop-off and an exchange of some kind of information and a shard, and how you're going to go there and hopefully crash the party. It seems very conspiracy-esque, seems like it won't lead to anything, but as you go to the location, wait some time, you discover 2 very interesting and somewhat familiar faces. A meeting between the Maelstrom gang as well as another mysterious black van driven by a Jane and John Doe. This being extremely similar to what we saw earlier in that Parallels questline, where you had that van monitoring the Parallels return to a Maelstrom base. From here, after clearing out all of the various enemies, you actually can pick up the shard on one of their bodies, to which you get what seems like nonsense. Just a shard that looks like it doesn't make much sense, but if you take the first letter of each word here, it does read Project Oracle Command Execute Plans. And this is another one that is just somewhat left off. We're not totally sure what Project Oracle even is and what this is doing. It seemingly is executing some kind of plans around this program. As you return to Gary's spot to give the chip back to him, you'll discover that Gary was actually taken, and not taken by any random individuals, but taken by blue-eyed men into a cloaked AV. So now that is a very obvious comparison to Mr. Blue Eyes and what was going on during the Parallels questline. Things actually get a bit deeper. So if you roll the clock back and look back at Mr. Blue Eyes, Mr. Parallels, and even Gary himself, all of them are wearing the exact same ring. Now what this ring means or doesn't mean isn't totally clear, but each character wears this ring that isn't really seen much else in the world overall. It doesn't seem like this ring is just a coincidence or that these blue-eyed men are meaningless, but there is some kind of connection here. The interesting connection being where else we could find this ring. One of the other big mysteries with Cyberpunk 2077 are these statues or monuments you could find all around the world. There's 6 of these monuments in total, 2 of which actually read FF06B5. Despite only 2 actually having those numbers, the other 4 are completely identical, sometimes just being a shrunken or larger size. And although one that reads the number is found in the Arasaka warehouse, the other one is found in Corpo Plaza. And if you go up to this monument in Corpo Plaza, you could find several monks praying to it, and on their finger, those monks also have the exact same ring as Gary, Mr. Parallels, and Mr. Blue Eyes. And as far as I could tell thus far, those are the only characters to actually be wearing this ring. Right now, there's an entire subreddit dedicated to trying to figure out what FF06B5 actually means, and although it does correspond to this color, otherwise we don't know much. There's another monument in the game that actually holds these 2 little balls that almost look like it is that exact color, and even in one area of the game you could find this kind of hidden alleyway room that does have a smaller version of that monument and a door that leads nowhere, although perhaps that's a clue that this doesn't actually mean anything. And really right now, that's where this mystery stands. Some of these faces do pop up again. Mr. Blue Eyes you can find watching you yet again as you enter into Arasaka Tower. Also, if you do one of the endings, you can actually be hired by him to raid the space station, and although you would think those further interactions reveal more, they really don't. They just increase the mystery of his character. And even in a separate ending, Mr. Parallels will call you during the epilogue of the game. Depending on whether or not you told him about the spying going on against him, you'll get different outcomes. If you didn't tell him about the spying going on by SSI, he is relatively confident and wins the election for mayor by a larger margin of 70%, and he wants to hire you as the head of his private security. But if you did tell him about the spying, he is significantly more paranoid, is suspicious of his wife, and even won the election by a much smaller, only 49% of the vote. And even further, something that could be super significant or nothing, in one of the 2018 trailers, you could actually see Mr. Blue Eyes' face. This not being one of the gameplay trailers, but it does show early on this character, or at the very least the way he looked, was taken into consideration, suggesting he is very likely to play a larger role later. So overall, it really feels like this has to lead somewhere and is very likely connected in some way. It certainly seems like Corp is heavily involved in these in-game quests and whatever is going on here. They perhaps could be that mysterious organization. Sandra Dorset having some evidence of this mind control and seeing the mind control seemingly pop up several more times later seems connected. Now the in-game mystery and the ARG mystery definitely could be unconnected, but either way it is all really interesting. We've heard numerous times now how there seemingly are still some undiscovered things in the game. Perhaps the actual outcome to these mysteries or the ARG overall is still undiscovered. Or maybe we're just waiting for more updates, more expansions, or more word from the devs on what to do next. Either way, it definitely seems like there's going to be a lot more to figure out around Cyberpunk 2077, whether it's out of the game or in-game. And hopefully this video serves as a pretty good recap as to where things stand now. If you're interested in getting more involved, I'll have some links down below to some of these communities researching this stuff. But otherwise, as always again, I thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you found this one informative. It is always fun to cover these in-game mysteries. But with that said, I hope to see you all next time. Later.